Hey everyone, it's Dave from Dave's Ohio Barbecue. You know, I've been meaning to cook a pork shoulder on my offset smoker, but I wanted to do something special, so I took two of my favorite chefs. I took their recipes for doing pork butts, and I'm going to do them side by side and see which one we like the best. Stick around. So living in the Cleveland area, Michael Symon, who you may know from TV, he lives in Cleveland and he has a lot of restaurants around here. And he's one of my favorite chefs when it comes to, unique styles of barbecue. So for today's cook, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take his recipe for doing a pork butt, and then I'm going to take a recipe from one of my other favorite barbecue chefs, Meathead Goldwyn, and I'm going to do those both up and compare them side by side. Both these recipes that I'm using can be found in different places. The recipe for this, for Meathead Goldwyn's pork butt recipe, all I'm using is the rub recipe for his Memphis Dust, which you can find on his website, AmazingRibs.com. So the Michael Symon recipe, I found that in his new cookbook, Playing with Fire. It's all barbecue recipes. It's really nice. I like it. It's got got a lot of good recipes in it. As always, though, I will provide these recipes and links to the website and where you can get the book down below in the description. So let's start with what the rubs are for this recipe. First of all, Michael Symon's recipe doesn't mention anything about brining, but Meathead's does. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brine both of these pork butts. So what I'm going to be using for this cook are two boneless pork butts. I prefer to cook bone-in pork butts, but these were on sale and they looked good, so I bought them. And for this challenge, I thought they'd be just fine. But one step I am going to take to make sure they don't dry out or don't cook unevenly is I'm going to take a little bit of kitchen twine. I'm going to kind of tie them up into a package. First of all, let's look at the two rub recipes. Okay, we've got Michael Symon here on the left, and we've got Meathead Goldwyn's on the right. One of the things that you'll notice, the difference between these rubs, is Michael Symon's has a pretty big quantity of salt in it and no sugar. Whereas Meathead's doesn't have any salt, but it does have a significant amount of sugar. So I'm going to modify just a little bit because I like using Meathead Goldwyn's method of dry brining my meat first. So what you do is, depending on how big your cut of meat is, you take about a half teaspoon of salt. I just use regular sea salt. I don't use kosher salt for this. And you take a half teaspoon of salt per pound of meat and just kind of sprinkle it on top of the pork butt, usually 12 to 24 hours ahead of time. Wrap them up, put them in the fridge, and let them sit. Since I'm going to be doing that to both pork butts, I thought it would be wise to adjust the amount of salt in the Michael Symon recipe. So I pretty much just cut it in half because I didn't want it to be overly salty and kind of, overpower everything else. So once these two pork butts have sat, I let them sit actually for about 18 hours in the fridge. I'm going to unwrap them, going to dry them off. Anything needs to be dried off. And then I'm going to apply these rubs. So before I apply the rub to these two, they both have a different method for applying the rub. Meathead suggests that you just kind of spread some water on your pork butt to let the rub stick to it. So I'm just going to spritz down that pork butt with just tap water and then put the rub on top. For Michael Symon's, he's a big fan of using mustards. A lot of time he uses stadium mustard, which comes from the Cleveland area. In this recipe, though, he called for just yellow mustard. So I'm going to use yellow mustard on here, coat the whole thing, and then apply the rub to that. I'm going to try to apply them about the same thickness, about the same amount. I just want to really see what the flavors of this does. I'm not doing it too much before I start smoking them. It's only about a half hour before I put these things on the smoker. So for smoking this today, I'm going to use my Bayou Classic offset smoker. I'm going to use apple wood since I have so much of it. I'm just going to use that. It seems like a nice neutralish kind of wood to use. And I'm going to be running the smoker between 225 and 250. I don't want to get too much above that because I do want this to be low and slow. These pork butts probably are going to take anywhere between 10 and 12 hours to cook properly. So once they're on there, I'm just going to let them sit. And I'm just going to let it go at least for the first 3 hours or so. I don't really like to mess around with it much. Once we get to a little bit towards the end, I might spritz it with a little bit of water, but I don't really like to do too much of that because I really want nice bark formation, and I'm afraid if I wet down the bark too much, it's not going to give me that nice, almost crispy, crunchy bark that I like on my pork butt. So what I'm aiming for with these pork butts is I'm going to cook them till they get to about 200, 203 degrees. pull them, let them sit for a half hour, and then I'm going to serve it up. Be warned though, if you've never cooked a pork butt before, there is something called the stall. What the stall is, that's when all the moisture inside of the meat is starting to kind of evaporate and squeeze out, and it'll level off your temperature of your meat for a while. In my case, if you look at this graph here, it was going up fine and dandy till it got to about 170 degrees, and then it stalled. In fact, the temperature went down a little bit for almost 2 hours before it started creeping up again. Now you may notice that when you look at this graph here, there's a section where the temperature drops out completely. I had to unplug my probe, and I actually brought these pork butts inside and finished them in the oven for the last about 25-30 minutes. Reason being, huge rainstorm came through here, and it cooled off the temperature of the smoker so dramatically that I couldn't get an umbrella up or a tarp over it or anything. So what I did was I just put them in a pan, brought them inside, and finished it that way. At that point, they'd absorbed all the smoke they were going to absorb, so it didn't really matter that much anyway. So you can tell it's done when you look at it. When a fork goes in nice and easy, then you know it's done. If you have the bone in it and the bone will jiggle and pull out partially, it's done. You also want to see that nice dark mahogany bark on there. That's when you know you're getting real close. So what I did was I brought these inside and I shredded them up. We're going to make pulled pork sandwiches out of them. You can see they both shred pretty easily. The Michael Symon one shredded nice, had a nice smoke ring in it. The flavors were a little bit more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but a little bit more European or something. They're just, it's not what I would call traditional American barbecue. It had a little bit of a unique flavor to it, and that might have been because of the ground coriander in there. It added a certain something to it. I really liked it. Put a little barbecue sauce on it, put it on a sandwich. It was delicious, but it is different than what I was used to. The Meathead Goldwyn one, everyone agreed that one was like traditional barbecue. That one was sweet. The bark was nice and crusty, and it tasted really good on a sandwich. Chuck a couple pickles or some coleslaw on there, and it was delicious. So there you have it. That's a side-by-side. When I asked everyone who was over for dinner what they thought, mostly they said the Michael Symon one tasted maybe a little bit more sophisticated, but not necessarily better. And the Meathead Goldwyn recipe was what they really thought like a true barbecue pork butt should taste like. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. Make sure you tell a friend about it. If you haven't yet, go follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I've got a lot more recipes coming out soon, so please make sure you check back. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.